Boston in the 1700s was a tinderbox wrapped in colonial charm, a bustling port of 15,000 souls where Puritan certainty was colliding with Enlightenment ideals, where British merchants grew rich on rum and molasses while radical thinkers plotted revolution in taverns and meeting houses. This cramped peninsula, connected to the mainland by a narrow neck of land, was becoming the intellectual and commercial heart of British North America. Yet it chafed under imperial control with growing intensity. The harbor bristled with ships carrying goods from across the Atlantic world. Manufactured goods from England, sugar from the Caribbean, rum from local distilleries, all flowing through wharves that stretched into the cold waters of Massachusetts Bay. Today, advanced AI technology allows us to transform period engravings, maps, and paintings into photorealistic recreations, bringing this revolutionary city back to life. Join me as we step into the Boston our ancestors once knew, a city that would spark a revolution and birth a nation. The waterfront, Boston's lifeline. Stand on Long Wharf in 1760, and you're standing on one of colonial America's greatest commercial achievements. This massive pier stretches nearly half a mile into Boston Harbor, long enough that ocean-going ships can dock directly alongside warehouses without needing smaller boats to transfer cargo. Look at the ships crowding the harbor. Those tall-masted vessels flying British colors carry manufactured goods from London: cloth, tools, tea, books, furniture, everything the colonies can't produce themselves. That cluster of smaller sloops? Coastal traders moving between Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Charleston, creating intercolonial commerce. But watch those ships with particular attention, the ones low in the water moving with suspicious speed. Those are likely smugglers, and they're essential to Boston's economy. The British Navigation Acts require colonists to trade only with Britain and pay heavy duties on imported goods, especially molasses from French and Spanish Caribbean islands. Boston merchants systematically ignore these laws, bribing customs officials using false manifest. The infamous triangle trade flows through here. Ships leave Boston loaded with rum distilled in local distilleries. They sail to West Africa, trading rum for enslaved humans. Those enslaved people are transported in horrific conditions to Caribbean sugar plantations. The ships return with molasses, which is distilled into more rum, completing the cycle. It's enormously profitable and morally monstrous. The waterfront smells of saltwater, tar, hemp rope, fish, and the sweet sour stench of molasses. Barrels are everywhere, being rolled, loaded, unloaded, stacked 10 high. Sailors from a dozen nations work the docks: English, Irish, Scottish, African, Portuguese, speaking a babble of languages. Watch the longshoremen. These are free laborers, mostly white, working brutal hours for decent wages. Slavery exists in Boston, but it's less economically dominant than in southern colonies. Most enslaved people here work as domestic servants, skilled craftsmen, or dock workers. The harbor itself is Boston's protection and prison. The islands dotting the bay make naval approach difficult, but the same geography makes expansion nearly impossible. Boston is running out of land, forcing development onto filled marshes and wharves built into the harbor. Faneuil Hall, the cradle of liberty. Walk up from the waterfront to Faneuil Hall, opened in 1743 as a combined market and meeting house. The ground floor is a bustling market where vendors sell meat, produce, and goods. But climb the stairs to the Great Hall, and you're in the space that will earn the name Cradle of Liberty. Town meetings happen here, gatherings where propertied men debate local issues, pass ordinances, and elect officials. This is direct democracy in action, rowdy and participatory, very different from hierarchical British government. By the 1760s, these meetings are becoming increasingly radical. British attempts to tax the colonies, the Sugar Act, Stamp Act, Townshend Acts, are debated here with growing fury. Speakers like James Otis and Samuel Adams turn these gatherings into protests against imperial overreach. The phrase, "no taxation without representation," echoes from these walls. Look around the hall. The men gathered here are mostly middle class. Merchants, shopkeepers, artisans. They're literate, politically engaged, and increasingly convinced that Britain is treating the colonies as exploitable resources rather than equal partners. But notice who's absent: women enslaved people, the poor, indigenous peoples. This emerging democracy is limited, exclusive, protecting the interests of propertied white men. The Old State House, symbol of British power. The Old State House sits at the intersection of King Street and several major roads, the physical and political center of colonial Boston. This brick building with its distinctive tower represents British authority in Massachusetts. The council chamber upstairs is where the royal governor and council meet, making laws in the king's name. Stand in front of this building on March 5, 1770, and you'll witness the Boston Massacre. Tensions between Bostonians and British soldiers have been building for months. Tonight, a confrontation near the Custom House escalates. A crowd surrounds British sentries, throwing snowballs, ice, rocks, taunting them. An officer brings reinforcements. The crowd presses closer, daring the soldiers to fire. Someone, it's never clear who, gives an order, or the soldiers panic. Shots ring out. 5 colonists fall dead or dying in the snow, their blood staining the white ground dark red. Crispus Attucks, a man of African and Native American descent, is among the first killed. The aftermath is immediate chaos. Church bells ring, calling citizens to arms. Thousands pour into the streets. Royal Governor Hutchinson rushes to the balcony and promises justice, barely preventing full riot. The soldiers are arrested and tried. John Adams, future president, defends them, winning acquittal for most because he believes in rule of law even when unpopular. But the propaganda value is enormous. Paul Revere creates an engraving depicting the incident as cold-blooded murder, and it spreads across the colonies, fueling anti-British sentiment. The North End, where immigrants cluster. Walk into Boston's North End, and you're entering the city's most densely packed neighborhood, a warren of narrow streets climbing Copp's Hill. This is where recent immigrants, mariners, and artisans crowd into wooden houses that lean precariously. The predominant group is Irish, mostly Protestant at this point, but there are also Scottish, some Jewish families, free and enslaved Africans, creating Boston's most diverse neighborhood. The accents are thick, the customs different from Anglo-Puritan mainstream. The houses are timber framed, 2 or 3 stories, often with shops on the ground floor. Families pack into small spaces. Multiple generations share rooms. In winter, the cold seeps through gaps in walls. Fire risk is constant. Look at the children playing in the streets. Many are barefoot even in cold weather. They work young, running errands, apprenticed to trades, helping in family shops, or going to sea as cabin boys. Education is valued in Boston. The Puritans founded schools and Harvard College. But poor families often can't spare children from work. The North End is where Paul Revere lives and works as a silversmith. In 1775, he'll make his famous midnight ride from here, galloping through the countryside warning that the regulars are coming out. His route will become legend. Old North Church stands at the neighborhood's heart. Its tall steeple is visible across Boston. In April 1775, 2 lanterns hung in that steeple, 1 if by land, 2 if by sea, will alert patriots that British troops are crossing the Charles River by boat to march on Lexington and Concord, triggering the Revolutionary War's first battles. The Common, Boston's shared space. Boston Common, established in 1634, is America's oldest public park, though calling it a park is generous. It's a cow pasture where citizens graze animals, a military training ground, and public execution site, all wrapped into one 50-acre space. On any given day, you might see militia companies drilling, learning the manual of arms that will prove essential when war comes. These aren't professional soldiers. They're shopkeepers, farmers, artisans required by law to own weapons and train regularly. The Common is also where public punishments happen. The stocks and pillory stand near Park Street, where petty criminals sit locked, while passers-by mock them and throw rotten vegetables. Whipping posts see regular use. Enslaved people who commit offenses often receive harsher punishments than free whites for identical crimes. For more serious offenses, the gallows stand ready. Public hangings draw enormous crowds, sometimes thousands, treating execution as spectacle and moral lesson. Condemned prisoners give speeches confessing sins and warning the crowd away from criminal paths. But the Common is also where ordinary life happens. Families picnic on warm days, children play games, couples court under supervision. The British Army will camp here when they occupy Boston in the 1770s, trampling grass and cutting trees for firewood, actions that further inflame colonial resentment. The taverns where revolution brews. Step into the Green Dragon Tavern on Union Street, and you're entering what Daniel Webster will later call the headquarters of the revolution. In these smoky rooms over tankards of rum, cider, and beer, Boston's revolutionary leaders meet, plan, and organize. The Green Dragon hosts the Long Room Club, the group that organizes resistance to the Stamp Act. They plan protests, coordinate with other colonies, write inflammatory pamphlets, and orchestrate actions like hanging tax collector effigies from the Liberty Tree. Samuel Adams, Paul Revere, James Otis, John Hancock, Joseph Warren all frequent this tavern, debating philosophy and plotting revolution. Taverns in colonial Boston are more than drinking establishments. They're community centers, news exchanges, meeting halls, and proto-democratic spaces where men from different classes mingle with relative equality. A merchant and a carpenter can share a table, debate politics, and toast liberty. The drink flows freely. Rum is the colonists' beverage of choice, cheap and plentiful thanks to the molasses trade. Beer and cider are common. Tea, ironically, is popular until it becomes a political symbol of British oppression, after which patriots ostentatiously switch to coffee. These taverns are where news arrives first. Ships from London bring newspapers and pamphlets. Information is shared, debated, interpreted, and spread through the city within hours. In an era before mass media, taverns serve as information hubs, forming public opinion, but they're also surveillance targets. British authorities know revolutionaries meet here. Spies infiltrate meetings. Tavern keepers must balance supporting the patriot cause with avoiding British crackdown. The storm brewing. By 1775, Boston is a city occupied by British troops, its port closed by parliamentary decree, its charter suspended, its people seething with resentment and preparing for war. The countryside around Boston is stockpiling weapons. Militias drill regularly. Committees of correspondence coordinate resistance. On April 19, 1775, British troops march from Boston to seize weapons stored in Concord. Paul Revere and William Dawes ride ahead, warning the countryside. At Lexington Green, militiamen face British regulars. Gunfire erupts. 8 Americans die. The British push on to Concord, but find most weapons already moved. On the march back, Colonial militia attack from behind walls and trees, turning the British retreat into a bloody fighting withdrawal. The Revolutionary War has begun, and Boston is at its center. The city will be besieged by colonial forces, occupied by British troops, and eventually evacuated when the British abandon it in March 1776. This Boston, this Puritan port town turned revolutionary hotbed, created something new. The idea that government derives legitimacy from the consent of the governed, that liberty is worth fighting for, that ordinary people have the right to challenge arbitrary power. The ideals were imperfect, the execution flawed, the benefits unequally distributed. But the seeds planted in Boston's taverns, meeting houses, and churches would grow into a nation and inspire liberation movements worldwide. If you enjoyed this glimpse into revolutionary Boston, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss where we're going next. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the past.